Hello, everyone. Welcome back to English Cat. Today, we are starting a very special series. We are going to learn about the history of the United States. But don't worry, this isn't a boring history lesson. This is a story about people. Imagine you are standing on a beautiful green farm in the year 1750. The air is clean, the sun is warm. You are in one of the 13 colonies in North America. At this time, there is no country called the United States. Instead, there are 13 colonies, and they all belong to Great Britain. The people living here are called colonists. Most of them are very happy to be British. They love the King of England. They speak English, they wear British clothes, and they drink British tea. Life is simple but good. In the north, people live in small towns with busy harbors. In the south, there are giant farms called plantations. People feel safe because Great Britain is the most powerful country in the world. The British Navy protects the oceans, and the British Army protects the land. But there is one important thing to remember. The colonies are very far away from England. To go from America to London, you have to sail on a ship for 2 months. Because of this distance, the colonists feel independent. They have their own small governments. They make their own local rules. For a long time, the king let them do what they wanted. But soon, everything began to change. The peaceful life on the farm was about to disappear. A dark cloud was growing over the Atlantic Ocean. Great Britain had just finished a big, expensive war against France. Britain won the war, but they had a huge problem. They had no money left. They were broke. The King of England, George III, looked across the ocean at the American colonies. He thought, "I protected these people. I sent my army to keep them safe. Now they should help me pay for the war." So the king and the British Parliament decided to create new taxes. A tax is extra money you must pay to the government when you buy something. First, there was the Stamp Act. This meant colonists had to pay a tax on every piece of printed paper they used. Newspapers, legal documents, and even playing cards. Later, they put taxes on glass, lead, paint, and tea. The colonists were not angry because of the money. Most of the taxes were actually quite small. They were angry because of a principle, a big idea. In England, people had a say in their government. But in the colonies, no one was allowed to vote for the people making these laws in London. The colonists started to shout a famous phrase, "No taxation without representation." This means, if we cannot vote, you cannot tax us. Imagine if a stranger walked into your house and told you that you had to pay him money to use your own kitchen. You would be angry, right? That is how the colonists felt. They felt like they were being treated like children, not like British citizens. The friendship was breaking. The colonists started to ignore the laws. They started to get organized, and soon their anger would lead to a very famous party in Boston. The year is 1773. The city is Boston, Massachusetts. The air is cold, and the people are very, very angry. By now, the king had removed most of the taxes because the colonists complained so much. But he kept one tax, the tax on tea. In those days, tea was the most popular drink in the world. Everyone drank it. By keeping the tax on tea, the king was saying, "I am still the boss." On a dark December night, a group of men dressed up in disguises. They walked quietly to the Boston harbor. 3 large British ships were sitting in the water, filled with hundreds of wooden chests of tea. The men climbed onto the ships. They didn't hurt anyone. They didn't steal anything. They simply used axes to break open the chests and threw all the tea into the cold ocean water. Imagine the scene: thousands of pounds of tea floating in the dark water. The harbor smelled like a giant teapot. This event became known as the Boston Tea Party. When King George heard the news, he was furious. He didn't see it as a protest, he saw it as a crime. He decided to punish Boston. He closed the harbor so no ships could come in or out. He sent thousands of British soldiers to live in the city. The people of Boston were hungry and scared, but something amazing happened. The other colonies, like Virginia and Pennsylvania, didn't leave Boston alone. They sent food, they sent money. For the first time, the 13 colonies weren't acting like 13 separate groups. They were starting to act like one. They were becoming united. But peace was now impossible. The sound of drums was getting louder. The war was coming. We are now in April 1775. The tension has reached a breaking point. In the countryside near Boston, the colonists were secretly hiding weapons and gunpowder. They called themselves Minutemen because they said they could be ready to fight in just 1 minute. The British general in Boston heard about these secret weapons. He ordered his soldiers to march into the countryside to find them and to arrest the colonial leaders. In the middle of the night, a man named Paul Revere jumped on his horse. He galloped through the dark woods, shouting to every house, "The British are coming! The British are coming!" As the sun began to rise over a small town called Lexington, a group of 70 farmers stood in a field. They were holding old hunting guns. They were shaking with fear. They were facing the British Army, the best soldiers in the world, wearing bright red uniforms. These soldiers were called redcoats. Suddenly, a shot rang out. No one knows who fired first, but that single bullet changed the world. This moment is called the shot heard round the world. Why? Because it was the start of a revolution that would change how people thought about freedom everywhere. The fighting moved to another town called Concord. The British were surprised. The colonists weren't fighting like a normal army. They were hiding behind trees and stone walls. They were fighting for their homes. By the end of the day, the British had to retreat back to Boston. Many people were dead. There was no turning back now. A small group of colonies was now at war with the most powerful empire on earth. The year is 1776, and the colonies are at war. The colonies needed a general to lead their new continental army. They chose a man from Virginia named George Washington. Washington was a tall, quiet man. He didn't talk much, but he was very brave. He didn't have many soldiers, and his soldiers didn't have shoes, blankets, or enough food. But Washington had something better. He had the respect of his men. He stayed with them in the cold and the rain. He never gave up. While Washington was training his army, other leaders gathered in Philadelphia. They wanted to explain to the world why they were fighting. They asked a young man named Thomas Jefferson to write a document. This document is the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson wrote some of the most famous words in history. He wrote that all men are created equal. He wrote that everyone has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. On July 4, 1776, the leaders signed the paper. This was a very dangerous thing to do. If they lost the war, the king would hang them all as traitors. When the people heard the declaration, they cheered. They pulled down statues of the king. They felt like they were no longer British subjects. They were Americans. But saying you are independent is easy. Actually being independent is very hard. The British were not going to leave. The war was about to get much longer and much more painful. By 1777, the war was not going well for George Washington. His army lost many battles. The British took control of New York City and Philadelphia. The lowest point came in the winter at a place called Valley Forge. The American soldiers had to stay in small wooden huts. It was freezing cold. They did not have enough coats. Many soldiers had no shoes, and you could see their bloody footprints in the white snow. There was very little food. Many men got sick and died from hunger and cold. Imagine the sadness in that camp. Many soldiers wanted to go home. They felt like they were losing. They felt forgotten. But George Washington did not leave. He stayed in the snow with them. A soldier from Europe named Baron von Steuben came to help. He taught the Americans how to march and how to use their guns better. Even in the darkest winter, the men practiced. They became a real army. They learned that they could suffer together and survive. At the same time, a famous American named Benjamin Franklin was in France. He was trying to convince the King of France to help. The French hated the British, so they finally agreed. They sent ships, money, and more soldiers. This changed everything. The Americans were no longer alone. The underdog, the small team that everyone thinks will lose, now had a chance to win. The year is 1781. The war has lasted for 6 long years. Everyone is tired. The British are tired of spending money. The Americans are tired of fighting. The British general, Lord Cornwallis, moved his army to a small town on the coast called Yorktown, Virginia. He thought the British Navy would come to help him. But George Washington saw an opportunity. He moved his army south very quickly. At the same time, the French Navy arrived and blocked the ocean. The British were trapped. They couldn't run away on land, and they couldn't escape by sea. Washington's army surrounded the town. For days, they fired cannons at the British. Finally, General Cornwallis realized he had no choice. He had to surrender. On October 19, 1781, the British army marched out of Yorktown and laid down their weapons. A famous story says that a British band played a song called "The World Turned Upside Down." And it was true. The world had turned upside down. A group of farmers and merchants had defeated the greatest army in the world. 2 years later, a peace treaty was signed. Great Britain officially recognized the United States as a free and independent nation. The 13 colonies were now the United States of America. The war was over. The Americans had won their freedom. But now they faced a new question. How do we run a country? They didn't want a king. They had just fought a war to get rid of one. They wanted a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. They wrote a new set of rules called the Constitution. This document explained how the government would work. It made sure that no one person could have too much power. George Washington was elected as the first president. He could have been a king if he wanted to, but he chose to be a president. After 8 years, he did something amazing. He stepped down. He went back to his farm. He showed the world that in a democracy, leaders must give up power peacefully. The American Revolution changed the world. It showed that people could choose their own leaders. It inspired people in France, in South America, and all over the world to dream of freedom. Of course, the story wasn't perfect. At that time, freedom did not include everyone. Many people were still enslaved, and women could not vote. The new country still had many problems to solve, but a seed had been planted, the seed of liberty. Thank you for listening to this series on English Cat. You have learned about the brave people, the difficult battles, and the big ideas that created a new nation. Your English is getting better every day. Keep listening, keep practicing, and keep dreaming. I'll see you in our next story. Goodbye.